Yes, I am absolutely elated that you decided to return for, well, what was supposed to be most likely the last part of my Awakening series. Evidently, though, I lied, or simply had more information to share than should fit in one segment. So, it looks like this is going to be the second to last segment. Hold your applause, please. Now, we were just about to get into one of the most repeated questions I feel has been asked since the beginning of time, which is, why do bad things happen to good people? Well, as I tried to explain with the Steve Mineo tragic that ended in the hands of his girlfriend, Sherry eloquently explains that many churches preach an erroneous sin defeatism mentality whereby we are all born in sin, can never overcome it, can never keep it out of our lives, and are helpless to do anything about it until we receive glorified bodies. As you probably already know, Yahushua never sinned, as he came as a man, had a physical body just as we do, and had the same temptations and desires, if not more, considering people were undoubtedly trying to tempt him at every turn. Nevertheless, he overcame them by walking in holiness. And that's what he teaches us to do, yet so many refuse to think that is even possible. They quote Paul, who misquoted David when he proclaimed, as we'd gone over in the previous part, there's no righteous, not one. Again, David was referring to there were no righteous, wicked, atheists, not people in general. We can walk righteously in the Lord, just as Abraham, Noah, and many others did. People don't have to sin. People just choose to sin, especially when they feel there's a quick fix for any sin in way of saying a quick salvation prayer, or as mentioned before, in Catholicism, simply going to confession and start with a clean slate after reciting the specific prayers that the quote-unquote Father directs you to say. Another thing is most people are so full of apostasies and doctrines of devils that they think they're living righteously before the Father, the real and only Father, in heaven, mind you, when in actuality they are not. They aren't following his ways, but rather the teachings of man, thanks to false apostle Paul, and they don't realize how far away from him and the truth as it is in him that they actually are. So yes, believers who are in sin are caught with unconfessed sin in their lives can most certainly become abducted, imprisoned, raped, tortured, and even killed by aliens. Absolutely. You can see in the book of Micah that this alien phenomena is not a new one. It has been going on for thousands of years. Aliens are merely wicked fallen angels who prey on mankind to eat and deceive them and lead them into error, apostasies, blasphemies, and sin. And believers are not immune to them when they aren't walking in holiness or keeping sin out of their lives that isn't confessed. Yahweh turns away from them and allows these things to happen to them because they were ill in their doings, quote unquote, meaning they were in sin. Now the passage in Micah chapter 3 verses 2 through 4 describes perfectly and confirms what many people have already described with what's going on in underground alien bases such as the previous Dulce base in New Mexico, as well as others. Now, Satan has full access to operate in our earthly realm, under our earth, and in space. This means other fallen angels and those who fell with him do as well. We simply refer to them all as aliens. Why? Well, because we have been indoctrinated, brainwashed, mind programmed, whatever you want to call it, into believing what aliens would be, if anything, had they ever shown their faces. Satan simply rules over them all as part of his kingdom, on earth, above earth, and in space, including in our churches. Did you hear that? All is fair in, well, evil and eviler. Satan also rules in our churches. But we've already discussed that, right? I know. But it's a topic that needs to be drilled home, as not enough people either believe it to be true or are aware of it at all. So I won't apologize for mentioning it a few more times before I'm done. It's that important. Just like how Satanists love to hide in plain sight, or how Yah gives all of his free will, and most importantly, instilling in all of you that quote-unquote, Jesus Christ is not the real name of our Lord and Savior, nor is it even a translated version, but rather a malicious trick used by Satan himself, as he also adopted that name to deceive the masses, especially during the end times. Again, I cannot say this enough. Our Messiah's real name is Yahushua ben David. I have believed for some time now that the FEMA concentration camps, a la Walmart's, which are very real, just ask those homeless people you don't see as much over the past year. They'll tell you, if given the chance, because they have already been taken there. Anyhow, all those Walmarts that had to close for plumbing problems all over the country simultaneously a few years back will be essentially used for a repeat of World War II, as in extermination. This time the target being Christians, primarily anyway. Even if they are lost sheep by still entering Babylon every Sunday, most still have good intentions in their heart, but refinement will most likely be required to show their undying love for Yahushua when the calm before the storm is over. Now, while we're speaking about Christians, let me explain something, if I haven't already, which I don't think I have, but if I had, it can always bear repeating. With the letter J having had not existed until the early 17th century in any language, the fabricated name Jesus Christ is malevolent and dishonorably used to deceive mankind from knowing the real Messiah Yahushua ben David. And since the word Christian naturally derives from that dishonorable name, then ask yourself, how can Christianity be a valid religion? It's not. It's a cult, created by false apostle Paul. He infiltrated the New Testament when they removed all those other original books from the Bible, specifically the Apocrypha, which again included the Book of Enoch, and replaced them with all 13 of, as I explained in part 4, his epistles, better known as his letters to each respective church, which is how those books of the Bible were named. And considering Paul added his book so much later, ask yourself, why wouldn't he use the real name of the only Messiah since he claimed to be so devoted to it? Doesn't make sense. Well, I think we know the answer to that now, don't we? I believe, and I'm totally going out on a limb by saying this, but I believe it's the same reason ministers from all 7 sects of Christianity still use the dishonorable name Jesus Christ. And that is to keep the malicious ruse going, all while, once again, hiding in plain sight. What? You disagree? Well, let me ask you this. Don't you think Bible colleges were made privy of the actual name of our Savior when they're being taught on theory and emotion while completely forgetting the Word? Let's see. Who would be the ones to run those said colleges? I know. How about the same people who print our textbooks and run our government? If you said Satan is serpent seed line, you are correct. And don't get me started on Christian music. Okay, I'll delve into it for just a moment or two. Just think, Christian music. Now, knowing what I've just explained to you about the word Christian stemming from the dishonorable name Jesus Christ, how could it possibly be honoring the real Messiah Yahushua ben David? That's easy. It's not. It's honoring Satan. 2 of the biggest names in the industry today, namely Chris Tomlin and Toby Mac, are prime examples of Christian artists deceiving their fans. Why would they do such a thing, you might ask? Well, how about the fact that religious parents won't question for a split second that their kids are listening to Christian music, probably the same music they themselves listen to? Thus, they even allow for their kids to hang up Christian artists' posters in their bedrooms, because, after all, they're Christian music artists serving the Lord. Hardly. I have included a couple links that show just how much honor these 2 specifically have for our Lord and Savior Yahushua. Now consider this if you would. Have any of you ever heard a Christian song singing about Yahushua instead of Jesus? Or Yahweh instead of the vague title God, including songs sung where else? In church. It's kind of like any award ceremony when the winner says, "First and foremost, I have to thank God. Without him, none of this could be possible." I sure haven't. And I'm willing to bet that they would hear about it from their handlers if they did use the actual names. Anyway, I too was in Christian music prior to my awakening, listening to channels like Air One and Family Life Radio all the time. actually feeling good about the message being spread. How could the message be anything but benevolent, right? Boy, was I in for a surprise. And it's so obvious now. In each of the respective links, you will see, if it weren't noticeable before, obvious signs and symbols on Chris Tomlin's album covers. And within the other link, Toby Mac screaming Illuminati by his appearance alone, with his crooked hat covering his darkened right eye within the shadow, his duality colors of black and white like those checkerboard floors in, say, the Vatican, not to mention his devil's claw / lion's paw hand gesture, while standing at attention by placing his right hand over his heart and left firmly at his side. Most asleep people don't even know they themselves are indicating Illuminati hand signs, with, say, the peace sign, the sign of Pan, the horned god, or that simple right hand over the heart. Now, what is it again we're all expected to do when standing for the national anthem or reciting the Pledge of Allegiance in school? Corrupt, corporation-driven public schools, mind you? More deception. The real meaning behind that hand gesture, you ask? Well, the sign of the hand of the heart represents a reminder of the Masonic obligation of silence for the fellow craft degree, in which the heart shall be torn out of its mason were to break his Masonic oath. At least with heavy metal music, you know they aren't trying to hide. Like I mentioned before, this world is nothing but a cruel illusion, a kingdom run by Satan, constantly at war. If it were Yahushua's kingdom, well, just read John chapter 8, verse 36, and you'll understand why it's not his, nor does he want it, at least not yet. War, there are no winners in war, none, except for those profiting off the blood, sweat, and tears of our sons and daughters. And just to expound on what I said earlier regarding the real motives behind quote-unquote war, the Illuminati, cabal, deep state, whatever, it amounts to the same thing, a secret society that has ruled the world for eons, regardless of what you want to call them, they own entire countries. Therefore, they don't have to pick sides when they're the ones who caused the war, despite both countries being owned by them. Think about that long and hard before letting your son and daughter enlist in the military. Now, I have a nephew who recently joined the National Guard, and I really wish I would have known of his plans before he'd enlisted. But I had absolutely no clue it was even on his radar. Maybe I could have talked him out of it, but now I don't know what to say, or if I just say anything, now that he's graduated from boot camp. At least it's only the National Guard and not the full-fledged Army, but the National Guard is bad enough. And the National Guard will definitely, more than likely, come into play during martial law with FEMA camps. So that just crushes me to know that he'll be a part of that. Anyway, I look at all these parents who have lost children in extended military engagement, and those brave souls who lost a limb or two, who was able to return home. And it crushes me, knowing what I know now, that they weren't fighting for this country, as they were led to believe. By what else? Indoctrination. But rather they were fighting a lose-lose situation, where our government couldn't care less if we lose soldiers, just as long as both sides keep buying their hardware, on which they've cornered the market. Because again, that's where all the money is, and that's all they care about. And it's been this way ever since at least the 1861 American Civil War. Now this war that was expected to last an afternoon by most, in fact, I had even heard people were, for the lack of a better term, tailgating to the best of their ability with what they had, hoping to get a good view of the short and sweet pushover battle with the Southern Confederacy as huge favorites, as if watching in a reenactment. Instead, it lasted until 1865, and we all know who had ultimately won. Nevertheless, the toll left our country broke. As both sides had borrowed so much money by the end, the country was in complete peril and in danger of going bankrupt. Now guess who had lent both sides the money and started the war to begin with? The Rothschilds, the top family in the Council of 13, which are the 13 bloodline families of the serpent seed line of the Illuminati. This ultimately led to the Organic Act of 1871 as a bailout of sorts, But make no mistake about it, it was a strategic move by foreign interests in order for them to get their foot in the door of the United States. These are the very same foreign interests, namely Rothschilds, or if you go back far enough into their family tree, the Bowers, who funded both sides of that war, a war they initiated. This is when our country became a corporation, unknowingly enslaving all of those at that time, and all of us unknowingly, well, most of us still unknowingly, ever since via the strawman rouge, especially in 1933 when the birth certificate scam started. And you can read about that in the provided link called the Organic Act of 1871. Now let's backtrack a little bit. Let's go back 110 years prior to the Rothschilds' American Civil War strategy to learn a little more about the Bauer family, shall we? Now, what I'm about to share was pulled from the provided article link entitled what was it entitled? The Federal Reserve History of Lies, Thievery, and Deceit. Again, the Federal Reserve History of Lies, Thievery, and Deceit. Now, in 1773, a wealthy goldsmith and coin dealer named Mayer Amschel Bauer, remember that name I just said, Bauer, was born in 1743 and died in 1812. He summoned 12 wealthy and influential men to his place of business in Frankfurt, Germany. Now, his purpose for the meeting was to impress upon those men that if they pooled their resources, it was possible to gain control of the wealth, natural resources, and manpower of the entire world. He then outlined a 25-point plan on how to accomplish it. And I'm going to share that with you right now. And you tell me if any of this sounds familiar, even in relation to this day and age. Number 1, use violence and terrorism rather than academic discussions. Number 2, preach liberalism to usurp political power. Number 3, initiate class warfare. Number 4, politicians must be cunning and deceptive. Any moral code leaves a politician vulnerable. Number 5, dismantle existing forces of order and regulation. Reconstruct all existing institutions. Number 6, remain invisible until the very moment when it has gained such strength that no cunning or force can undermine it. Number 7, use mob psychology to control the masses without absolute despotism. One cannot rule efficiently. Okay, that one, I mean, if you think about Black Lives Matter or the most recent Charlottesville, Virginia incident, consider that one. Again, use mob psychology to control the masses without absolute despotism. One cannot rule efficiently. Number 8, advocate the use of alcoholic liquors, drugs, moral corruption, and all forms of vice used systematically by agentures to corrupt the youth. Number 9, seize properties by any means to secure submissions and sovereignty. Number 10, foment wars and control the peace conferences so that neither of the combatants gain territory, placing them further in debt and therefore into our power. Did you hear that one? I just explained that with the Civil War. Foment wars and control the peace conferences so that neither of the combatants gain territory, placing them further in debt and therefore into our power. Unbelievably deceptive and malicious. Anyway, number 11, choose candidates for public office who will be servile and obedient to our commands so they may be readily used as pawns in our game. Choose candidates, as in select candidates. Number 12, use the press for propaganda to control all outlets of public information while remaining in the shadows, clear of blame. Does that ring a bell in the election campaigns of 2016? I'll read that again. Use the press for propaganda to control all outlets of public information while remaining in the shadows clear of blame. Number 13. Make the masses believe they had been the prey of criminals, then restore order to appear as the saviors. Ever hear of order out of chaos? That's exactly what that explains right there. Make the masses believe they had been the prey of criminals, then restore order to appear as the saviors. Number 14. Create financial panics. Use hunger to subjugate the masses. Number 15. Infiltrate Freemasonry to take advantage of the Grand Orient Lodges to cloak the true nature of their work in philanthropy. Spread their atheist materialistic ideology amongst the Goyim, a la Gentiles. Number 16. When the hour strikes for our sovereign Lord of the entire world to be crowned, and that is Satan, by the way, their influence will banish everything that might stand in his way. I'll read that again. When the hour strikes for our sovereign Lord of the entire world to be crowned, their influence will banish everything that might stand in his way. Number 17. Use systematic deception, high-sounding phrases, and popular slogans. The opposite of what has been promised can always be done afterwards. That is of no consequence. I'll read that one again. Use systematic deception, high-sounding phrases, and popular slogans. The opposite of what has been promised can always be done afterwards. That is of no consequence. In other words, promise anything they want. You don't have to deliver. You'll already be elected, or selected rather. Number 18, a reign of terror is the most economical way to bring about speedy subjection. I mean, that says that all, if you consider the last 15 years, 17 years since 9/11, including 9/11. Number 19, masquerade as political, financial, and economic advisors to carry out our mandates with diplomacy and without fear of exposing the secret powers behind national and international affairs. I'll read that again. Masquerade as political, financial, and economic advisors to carry out our mandates with diplomacy and without fear of exposing the secret power behind national and international affairs. Really says it all right there. Number 20, ultimate world government is the goal. Ever heard of one world order, our new world order, one world government? That's it, number 20. Again, ultimate world government is the goal. It will be necessary to establish huge monopolies, so even the largest fortunes of the Goyim, Gentiles, will depend on us to such an extent that they will go to the bottom together with the credit of their governments on the day after the great political smash. Number 20. Use economic warfare. Rob the Goyim, a la Gentiles, of their landed properties and industries with a combination of high taxes and unfair competition. Number 22. Make the Goyim destroy each other so there will only be the proletariat left in the world, with a few millionaires devoted to our cause and sufficient police and soldiers to protect our interest. Number 23. Call it the new order. Call it the new order. Appoint a dictator. A dictator. Not a president, a dictator. Anyway, number 24. Fool, bemuse, and corrupt the younger members of society by teaching them theories and principles we know to be false. Again, fool, bemuse, and corrupt the younger members of society by teaching them theories and principles we know to be false. Number 25. Twist national and international laws into contradiction, which first masks the law and afterwards hides it altogether. Substitute arbitration for law. I definitely have to read that one again. Twist national and international laws into contradiction, which first masks the law and afterwards hides it altogether. Substitute arbitration for law. Let that sink in for a while. It's a mouthful right there. And I'll get a mouthful of drink. Okay, so you just heard the 25. And again, That was the 25 points that Mayor Michelle Bauer outlined on how to accomplish gaining control of wealth, natural resources, and manpower of the entire world. Think about that. Think about everything you've heard recently, awake or not. Okay, the plan was to put into operation and evidentiary information exists that Bauer aligned himself with Adam Weishaupt, who was the founder of the Illuminati, whose aim was and still is world domination. Now, there are arguments in favor of the Illuminati being in existence way before Weishaupt came into play on May 1st, 1776. Now, does that year ring a bell? But you can perform your own research on that matter. Anyhow, Bauer later changed his name to Rothschild, which means red shield. He took it from the red sign which hung outside his place of business. The eagle was clutching 5 golden arrows in its claws. It was supposed to symbolize his 5 sons. Presently, the red shield represents the official coat of arms of the city of Frankfurt, Germany. Later on, each of the 5 sons were dispatched to a major city in Europe to establish a branch of the Rothschild banking firm. Son number 1, Amschel, remained in Frankfurt and propelled Germany to financial success under Bismarck. Son number 2, Solomon, went to Vienna, Austria, and he became a leader in the Austria-Hungary Empire. Number 3, son Nathan went to England where he took control of the Bank of England. Number 4 son, Karl, went to Naples where he became the most powerful man in Italy through his banking skills. And the number 5 son, James Jacob, went to Paris where he established the central bank. He was credited with dominating the financial destiny of the nation of France. Now by 1850, the House of Rothschilds represented more wealth than all the families of Europe. Shortly after he formed the Bank of England, William Patterson lost control of it to Nathan Rothschild. And here's how he did it. Nathan Rothschild was an observer of the day the Duke of Wellington defeated Napoleon at Waterloo, Belgium. He knew that with this information he could make a fortune. He later paid a sailor a big fee to take him across the English Channel in bad weather. The news of Napoleon's defeat would take a while to hit England. When Nathan arrived in London, he began selling securities and bonds in a panic. The other investors were deceived into believing that Napoleon won the war and was eyeing England, so they began to sell their securities too. What they were unaware of is that Rothschild's agents were buying all the securities that were being sold in a panic. Now, in one day, the Rothschilds' fortune grew by £1 million. They literally bought control of England for a few cents on the dollar. The same way the Rockefellers went into Japan after World War II and bought everything 10 cents on the dollar. Everyone's familiar with the word Sony, S-O-N-Y, how big of a company that is? Well, it equals Standard Oil New York, S-O-N-Y, Standard Oil New York, a Rockefeller company. Talk about hiding in plain sight. Frederick Morton wrote in his book, The Rothschilds, the wealth of the Rothschilds consists of the bankruptcy of nations. Think about that. In order for them to get wealthy, they have to bankrupt nations, and they've done it for a long time. There were other wealthy families in Europe and America which were allowed to join the International Banking Club, such as John D. Rockefeller and John Pierpont Morgan. You probably know him better as J.P. Morgan, rather. As in J.P. Morgan Chase. Anyway, you can read more about that via the previously mentioned article, but that should give you some kind of an idea of what was really going on, and still is to this day. Nevertheless, guess who owned the privately foreign-owned offshore corp known as the U.S. Federal Reserve, created in 1913? If you said the Cabal, give yourself a gold star. And what major American event happened the year prior? If you said the unsinkable Titanic sank in 1912, give yourself another gold star. You are on a roll. But did you know that that horrific tragedy was actually a false flag? Now, for those of you who don't know what that term means, false flag is an event that happens, but not nearly the way the public was led to believe by, say, the media or government, just like the bombing of Pearl Harbor, as I mentioned earlier. They control the narrative, as I'd also mentioned earlier, And that's the definition of a false flag. And it's been this way since at least biblical times. Anyway, by the end of World War I, wartime costs had depleted the treasury, and there were several really bad financial panics. The country needed to print more money than it had as equity to restore confidence in the money supply and get the economy back on its feet, not unlike, say, the just mentioned American Civil War. Seen a pattern yet? Now, when you or I need money, we either beg our parents or use something as collateral to go to the bank for a loan. Now, when a country needs more money, it has to go somewhere also. But where? Well, in 1913, there wasn't anywhere to go. So the U.S. created the Federal Reserve Act. Now, remember what I had just said a few minutes ago about that very thing and what happened the year prior. Anyhow, this established a private central bank, the Federal Reserve Bank, that would regulate the amount of money the U.S. government was allowed to borrow and put into circulation. Oh, and I should mention that it would also expect to be repaid, like any bank, with interest. After only 20 years, consequently, things went from bad to worse. During Franklin Delano Roosevelt's presidency in 1933, the U.S. was unable to pay its debt. The country was bankrupt. And guess what? The private banks that made up the Federal Reserve demanded their money, and Roosevelt responded. He had to use the only thing left of any value to pay the banks, and continue doing business with them. Are you ready for this? He used the citizens of our country. Us. Did you hear that? He used the citizens of our country. Us. Exactly how all this was orchestrated involves a lot of red tape, of which I cannot get into right now, but this much can be told. The original birth or naturalization record for every U.S. citizen is on file in the official records in Washington, D.C. You get to keep a copy, not the original, a copy. And the property and assets of every living U.S. citizen is pledged as collateral for the national debt, a la federal income tax. And we've been paying on a debt that was never ours ever since our parents, their parents, their parents. Well, I think you get the picture. Fun fact, the organic constitution for the United States of America. Let me repeat that. The organic constitution for the United States of America had 13 amendments. Therefore, the subsequent amendments, including the 16th Amendment, which allows Congress to levy an income tax without apportioning it among the states or basing it on the United States Census, were never legally implemented. To put it bluntly, the Act of 1871 formed a corporation called the United States, in all capital letters. The corporation, owned by foreign interests, moved in and efficiently shoved the original Constitution into a dustbin. With the Act of 1871, the organic Constitution was defaced, in effect vandalized and sabotaged, when the title was capitalized and the word for was changed to of, in the title just like so, the Constitution of the United States of America. Did you hear me earlier say the Constitution for the United States of America, as in the organic Constitution? See the difference? Very, very small, and if you don't pay attention, and I hope you're not, you'll miss it. Now let's fast forward some 104 years into the future to reach our present day, and we find ourselves in a similar predicament in the fact that the USA Inc. defaulted on their loans in 2013, as did U.S. territory Puerto Rico in 2016. Obama purposely spent so much money during his 2 terms that he accrued more debt than the previous 43 presidents combined. Did you hear that? He accrued more debt than the previous 43 presidents combined. Think about that for a minute and let that sink in. Okay, are you good now? Did you digest it? Great. Therefore, China primarily stepped in to absorb our corporation's debt, along with Russia. So now America is essentially owned by, you guessed it, China. I should mention, one of Hillary's last duties as Secretary of State was being a highly paid courier to hand the Chinese president the agreed-upon eminent domain package. This means that in the event the U.S. government defaults on its financial obligations to China, as did happen, the Communist government of China would be permitted to physically take inside the USA, land, buildings, factories, perhaps even entire cities, to satisfy the financial obligations of the US government. And who do you think coaxed Trump into running for president? Now I ask you, how can a foreign country who essentially owns America interfere with an election when the presidents are selected? Despite what the fake media, bogus polls showed, in hopes that Trump supporters wouldn't see the point of turning out in droves to vote, I do believe Trump trounced Hillary, and that this may have actually been the first presidential election where votes really mattered, because the pre-selected candidate didn't win, after all, in spite of her effort to steal it with the help of who else? Daddy Bush. Because the good guy stepped in up to the plate in order to save and restore the republic. Or so I thought. I'll get into that a little bit later. Anyhow, put simply, the feds have now actually mortgaged the physical land and property of all citizens and businesses in the United States. They have given to a foreign power, again, their constitutional power to take all of our property as actual collateral for continued Chinese funding of U.S. deficit spending and the continued carrying of U.S. national debt. Still not seeing a pattern? Well, maybe this will help. While all the hamsters were busy on their shiny new wheel, whether it be a new HD 4K big screen, the latest iPhone, Xbox, professional sports playoff, blockbuster movie to come out, Black Friday sale, app filters to make your face look like a cute little puppy dog, what have you, all of which are meant to, at the minimal, distract us from the real ongoings of the world. We were covertly handed off from one foreign interest to the next, simply because our government couldn't care less about we the people, who are supposed to rule a democracy. Now, are you seeing a pattern developing over history yet? I thought you might. In any case, within 2 weeks and 3 days, each certificate of live birth is to be filed in Washington, D.C. Now get this. Evidence reveals that there is even a federal child department established by the Shepard-Townsend Act of 1922 under the Department of Commerce that appears to be involved in this process in some way. Every citizen is given a number, the red number on a birth certificate. It's usually in the bottom left-hand corner. It looks like a seal, like a stamp with a raised number. Now each live birth is valued at from each live birth is valued at from $650,000 to $750,000 Federal Reserve dollars in collateral from the Fed. Excuse me. Now to read more about this, guess what? I have included a link to a really good article that articulately explains the dealings with this on a level most people can understand, unlike a lot of other sites I've read, and undoubtedly came away not only shaking my head in confusion but disgust. What I have just conveyed is an excerpt from that very article entitled, "Surprise, the Feds Own You." But if you've been hearing anything about Heather Ann Tucci Jafar attempting to access her Treasury Direct account in the last month, that's what it's all about. And Yah bless her for doing it too. But let me explain even further. This is pulled from the provided link, which is entitled Birth Cert is a Scam. Birth Cert is a Scam. It will blow your mind, or your head clean off your shoulders, or at least blow your mind, figuratively speaking, of course, as to how cunningly deceptive the serpent seed bloodline is. I've also included the second link from the academia.edu site. Because of birth certificate scams, your birth and marriage certificates is a fraud in all countries. Let me repeat that in case you didn't believe your own ears, or your head was blown off your shoulders and you got to reattach it. I'll wait. Because of the birth certificate scam, your birth and marriage certificate is a fraud in all countries. Now, when a policeman asks you, "Do you understand?" as they invariably do, what he's really asking is, "Do you stand under?" As in, do you stand under the law? No, officer, I don't, because I'm awake and I'm hip to your game. He would never expect that answer. That is just one example as to how unbelievably deceptive our government, a la serpent seed line, is, which we will talk about that particular word, government, in a few minutes. Here's a little background knowledge of your birth and marriage certificates as a global and national fraud and what you can do about it. Now, it is important to know that when you were born, you have entered a crime scene as you were sold for money to the banks. They make money out of you from a bond created from your birth certificate signed by your mother. Check this out. Every birth certificate is converted into a bond and then is passed on to the New York Stock Exchange and the Vatican Bank as a stock bond, which equals money, which equals value. Every birth certificate has a value and a serial number that can be checked for value. You effectively come under admiralty law. Listen to this closely. Your mother's womb was the cargo in the ship, and you were the berth. One more time. Your mother's womb was the cargo in the ship, and you were the berth. Every birth is to be registered as a corporate commodity in each country by UCC law, which is a Roman law dating back to 1302. Your name in all capital letters is your conformance to the corporate slave system. Now don't think for a second that that's not a big deal. It's a ginormously huge deal. It makes all the difference. Capital letters. And that includes everything that you sign that involves a contract with your name in all caps, like marriage license, any license for that matter, credit card offers, loans, everything. And it all stems from your birth certificate. Guess what? You're considered dead. Even though you know you're not, but are blatantly unaware that there's a carbon copy of you out there known as your straw man, you're dead on paper. So you are willingly, albeit unknowingly, cooperating to be part of the corporation whenever you sign anything where your name is in all caps, including anything that asks if you're a U.S. citizen instead of sovereign. Now let's talk about that word for a minute, sovereign. Sovereign, a real person. Sovereigns can own property, while citizens, subjects, cannot. According to the original Constitution, all government comes from the sovereign individual. Without the sovereign individual, there is no government. U.S. citizen, subject, on the other hand, a corporate fictitious entity that merely represents the real person. It acts as a straw man. When asked if you are a U.S. citizen on a corporate legal document, if you check yes, you agree to the terms of corporate law and unknowingly relinquish your sovereign status and transfer all of your rights to the United States corporation, since you are now under contract. Let me read that again, because I'm sure a lot of you are quickly trying to rewind that, but I'll go ahead and redo it so you don't have to. U.S. citizen subject. That's a corporate fictitious entity that merely represents the real person. It acts as a straw man. When asked if you are a U.S. citizen on corporate legal documents, if you check yes, you are agreeing to the terms of corporate law and unknowingly relinquish your sovereign status and transfer all of your rights to the United States corporation, since you are now under contract. Now, I'm sure we have all thought that we are sovereign citizens, but that is a huge contradiction of definitions. To call oneself a sovereign citizen or sovereign subject is an oxymoron, since sovereign and citizen subjects are mutually exclusive of each other. So why are we not sovereign people of the Republic of the United States of America? Simple, because the Republic does not exist and hasn't for a very long time. Remember, it was replaced by the strawman Constitution of 1871. Please read more on that subject via the provided link entitled Sovereign or Citizen. Now, supposedly, the Republic is in the process of being announced, that it's restored, that Trump was merely used as a burner president to bridge the gap between the shadow government's fraudulent constitution and the restored organic constitution. And all debt, whether it be your mortgage, car loan, student loan, credit card, whatever the case may relate to you, is supposed to be wiped clean during the upcoming NESARA process because of illegal banking practices. Not because they're giving everybody a break, but it's because it was illegal. What's more, anyone over the age of, I believe it's 21, is supposed to get a trust fund of sorts where we are paid a considerable sum of money on a monthly basis for I think it's 11 years. But again, I believe, like Sherry explains, it's all a big trap set up by the eighth and final regime in order to be invited here on a bribe so they can take over in way of the one world government, New World Order, for the Antichrist. So even though it sounds really good, and a lot of the awakened believe this is really going to happen, and they've known about it for a long time because they are in the know. Well, I hate to tell them this, but they are only partially in the know, as Sherry is the only person I can find who is even remotely aware of the way more dangerous cabal that awaits for all of us behind the scenes, as in the eighth and final regime. Think of it like a two bounty hunter scenario. Now initially they may appear to be willing to work together, like these two cabals seemingly have. But now the home stretch, where their at large target is within arm's reach, you can bet, well, all bets are off, that it immediately turns into a may the best man win no matter how much I have to cheat mentality, where the kid gloves are off and now they're playing for keeps, having no intention of sharing the prize. Well, that's what I believe we're going to be facing, an extremely rough baton handoff, where the just mentioned Awaken believes the cabal is dead, that peace and prosperity can commence, as we are once and for all finally free. Well, my friends, think again. It will only be another chapter in Satan's world, because he still runs the show, and will be this way until after Armageddon. I'll discuss this more a little later. Now, words of law are twisted in this most intelligent of crimes to deceive you. Earlier I said we'd get back to the word government. Well, your straw man makes sure your government, govern, which means control, and mint, which means mind, so control mind, has made money out of your birth. B-E-R-T-H. Not B-I-R, B-E-R-T-H, as in dock, mooring, anchorage, not unlike, yep, you guessed it, a cargo ship. Check out that site as it includes a lot more info, including the several clips that you may find interesting. Once again, I got sidetracked, didn't I? Let me get a drink and I'll get back on track. Okay, where were we? Oh, yeah, right. Back on the unsinkable watercraft, right? Now, as it turns out, there were three very rich and prominent men who were essentially convinced to take that fateful journey on the Titanic, and they were all opposed to the U.S. Federal Reserve System coming into play. So guess what? They had to be eliminated, regardless if 1,500 or so innocent people were killed in the process or not. The three men, John Jacob Astor of the Waldorf Astoria, and he was known as the wealthiest man in the world at the time, Benjamin Guggenheim, his family founded the Guggenheim Museum, and Isidor Straus, head of the Macy's department stores, were all killed. So the U.S. Federal Reserve no longer had any opposition to prevent it from being implemented. J.P. Morgan himself, incidentally, was evidently booked on the voyage, but conveniently canceled at the last second. Probably the biggest surprise of the entire tragedy, though, is not that Captain Edward Smith was in on it, but that the ship wasn't the ship that was sunk wasn't even the Titanic, but rather it was the Olympic. Did you hear that? The ship that was sunk wasn't even the Titanic. It was the Olympic. Ever hear of the bait and switch tactic? Anyway, read the provided article Titanic - false flag for the full story. But you can see how the timeline certainly fit together for all of this to go down, right? And before I forget, as far as the serpent seed line bloodline goes, don't think it's just a mere coincidence that this day and age we're spotting a lot more signs of reptilians around us than ever before. I've heard it's because of the vibrations increasing on the planet where they are less tolerable of it, so they are finding it more and more difficult to hold their human shape. That may in fact be the case, but I also believe it's happening in large part because of the aforementioned HD 4K features in the latest models of the big screens that are supposed to keep us distracted. Little do they know it would give us a lot of information, unless they want us to see what we're supposed to see at this time. Who knows? I'm sure that's part of the case, because we're not supposed to see anything we're not supposed to see, and they can make sure that we don't. Anyway, I digress. This is allowing us to catch things we may have otherwise ignored, dismissed, simply not given a second thought to, instead of now rewinding it and watching it in slow-mo. They know, we in the know, are well aware of their presence all around us. I am just hoping, however, that they, the cabal, doesn't reach the day where they don't care who knows, resulting in their not being concerned if they have to keep up the rouge. So they just start attacking Yah's holy seed humans in their natural form because the jig is up. But I have heard they are looking forward to that day, which, who knows, may coincide with the upcoming event, as in the arrival of the Galactic Federation Ashtar Command, a la Lilith's clan, the eighth and final regime. Speaking of the Cabal, to get a better understanding of their ultimate plans, check out the unbelievably horrid and disturbing Georgia Guidestones, which is essentially the Illuminati's deeply disturbing 10 Commandments, written in 8 different languages, which includes the first quote-unquote commandment as a call for a major depopulation to reach their downsizing goal of 500 million people, roughly disposing of 95% of the world's population. Do you hear that? They are calling for a depopulation to reach their downsizing goal of 500 million people. That's almost twice as many people as in America alone, just America, no other country. Roughly disposing of 95% of the world's population. How does that grab you? Did you hear me? Well, please, allow me to repeat it to avoid from you having to rewind it. The first commandment is a call for a major depopulation to reach their downsizing goal of 500 million people. I know I've already repeated this once, but it bears repeating 100 more times if necessary. Roughly disposing of 95% of the world's population. It was erected in 1980 at the behest of an anonymous person. I've included a couple links to it. It's hard to believe something like that can even exist, but it really does. But just remember, these beings are not human. They are not of Father Yah's holy seed. I hope that makes the medicine a little easier to swallow, like my grizzly bear analogy in the previous segment. Switching gears for a time being, the word tribulation means affliction. It is also known as the time of Jacob's trouble, as in Israel Jacob, Jacob's 14 tribes and 12 in the Revelation, and as stated in the last segment, the day of the Lord. Sherry has written an article on it as well, which naturally you will find included in the description. Most refer to Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy as their determination that the tribulation period is 7 years, but they are once again misinterpreting Daniel, because the 70-week prophecy has already been fulfilled, according to Sherry. Did you hear that? The 70-week prophecy has already been fulfilled. Now in Matthew 24, Yahushua tells us that we have sorrows and the great tribulation. And he doesn't say anything about a 7-year period. And neither do the other prophets. It all came from those misinterpreting the 70 weeks prophecy of Daniel. What's more, this is one of the truths that the Most High opened up to Sherry about. And she is passing it on to everyone else, and I'm doing the same. The only time period specifically mentioned in this time of the Great Tribulation itself. In Daniel chapter 7 verse 25 it reads, "And he shall speak great terrible words against the Most High, and shall wear out, persecute the saint of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hands until a time and times and the dividing of time," which is 3.5 years. In Revelations 11 verse 12 it says Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentile armies for 42 months, also 3.5 years, as we stated in the previous segment. In Revelations 11 verse 3 says the two witnesses, as in more than likely Elijah and Enoch, will prophesy 1,260 days, as in 1,260 days, or again 3.5 years. In Revelations 12 verse 14 it says the woman is taken into the wilderness for a time and times and a half a time, and that equals also 3.5 years, to be protected from the serpent. In Revelations chapter 13 verses 5 and 7 through 7, the Antichrist will blaspheme God and conquer the saints for 42 months, and the power was given unto him to continue 42 months. Again, 3.5 years. Now, Sherry believes the elect rapture is going to transpire within the next couple months, before Yah's cataclysmic pole shift, so his released creatures can seek out the wicked, as explained in Isaiah 24 verse 20. The earth will reel like a drunkard. Note, please remember this. Do not, under any circumstances, go outside during the 3 days of total darkness, which is when these said creatures will be out on the prowl for wicked ones. They will not discriminate as to whom they brutalize, which is why Father Yahweh has directed all his people to stay indoors during that entire time, which is on days 3 and ending sometime on day 6, according to Sherry. But just to be safe, you're much better off staying inside for the full 7-day catastrophic event. You can see the entire breakdown of the 7-day at yet another of Sherry's sites, which is included link I've entitled Pole Shift Breakdown. Now, in case you were wondering, the elect rapture, as Sherry explained, involves some of Father Yah's firstborn from above, as in the first angelic civilization, before either versions of Adam came into play. At least that's the way I understood it from her writings. Yah has sent these volunteering angels to earth to be born into the flesh for the first time in their existence in order to be here to help battle evil during these end times. Unlike fallen angels, Sherry says that these who volunteered were never incarnated as humans before. Some of Yah's chosen, like Sherry, know they are part of the elect, while others who are also don't have a clue. And as the Bible states, Satan will deceive the entire world, even Yah's elect, as stated in Matthew chapter 24, verse 24. It says, "For false messiahs and false prophets will rise up and perform great signs and wonders so as to deceive, if possible, even God's chosen ones," the elect. In John chapter 5, verse 43, it reads, "For I have come to you in my Father's name, and you have rejected me. Yet if others come in their own name, you gladly welcome them." Also, 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 1 through 3 says, "But there were also false prophets in Israel, just as there will be false teachers among you. They will cleverly teach destructive heresies," a Greek meaning choose of your own free will. There's that word again, free will, right? "And even deny the master who brought them. In this way they will bring sudden destruction on themselves. Many will follow their evil teaching and shameful immorality. And because of these teachers, the way of truth will be slandered. In their greed, they will make up clever lies to get hold of your money. But Father Yahweh condemned them long ago, and their destruction will not be delayed." Now let me explain something. The elect, or Yah's chosen, if you prefer, from my understanding, have no memory of their angelic lives. So they are down here like everyone else, and it's their responsibility to wake up. I would really like to think that I too fall into that unprecedented and prestigious exclusive group, and that is ultimately the reason why I felt compelled to put these pieces together during my awakening in hopes of waking up the masses through the knowledge the Most High Yahweh provided to me, whether it be through finding Sherry, through his direction or otherwise. And please understand this, an awakening never stops. You don't just awaken and everything is crystal clear, unlike before. It's a constant learning process, and that is why I've tried to piece together a one-stop shop of sorts with everything I've learned, so you have a lot of the knowledge right at your fingertips instead of going and looking it all up yourself. But again, don't take my word for it. I still highly recommend each of you do your own research. At any rate, this will not be the first or even the second time Father Yahweh has unleashed his wrath on the wicked of the world. Now, to find out about those events, you will just have to stay tuned to part 9, most likely the last portion. I mean it this time. But if this is where you decide to part ways, I really appreciate your attention thus far and wish you nothing but the best. Yah bless.